Because of Winn-Dixie, Chapter 5. Winn-Dixie couldn't stand to be left alone. We found that out real quick. If me and the preacher went off and left him by himself in the trailer, he pulled all the cushions off the couch and all the toilet paper off the roll. So we started tying him up outside with a rope when we left, but that didn't work either. Winn-Dixie howled until Samuel's and Mrs. Deltweiler's dog started howling too. It was exactly the kind of noise that people in an adult trailer park did not like to hear. He just doesn't want to be left alone, I told the preacher. That's all. Let's take him with us. I could understand the way Winn-Dixie felt. Getting left behind probably made his heart feel empty. After a while, the preacher gave in, and everywhere we went, we took Winn-Dixie, even to church. The Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi isn't a regular-looking church. The building used to be a Pick It Quick store. When you walk in the front door, the first thing you see is the Pick It Quick motto. It's written on the floor in little tiny red tiles that make great big letters that say, "Pick, pick, pick, quick, quick, quick." The preacher tried painting over the tiles, but the letters wouldn't stay covered up, so the preacher has just given up and let them be. The other thing about the Open Arms is that it is different from other churches, is that there aren't any pews. People bring their own fold-up chairs and lawn chairs, and sometimes they look more like a congregation that is watching a parade or sitting at a barbecue instead of being inside a church. It's kind of a strange church, and I thought Winn-Dixie would fit right in. But the first time we brought Winn-Dixie to Open Arms, the preacher tied him outside the front door. "Why do we bring him all the way here just to tie him up?" I asked the preacher. "Because dogs don't belong in church, Opal," the preacher said. "That's why." He tied Winn-Dixie up to the tree and said there was lots of shade for him there, and this ought to work out real good. Well, it didn't. The service started, and there was someone singing, and someone sharing, and someone praying, and then the preacher started preaching, and he wasn't but 2 or 3 words into the sermon when there was a terrible howling coming from outside. The preacher tried to ignore it. "Today," he said, "Arroo, Winn-Dixie." "Please," said the preacher. "Arroo," said Winn-Dixie back. "Friends," said the preacher. "Arroo," wailed Winn-Dixie. Everyone tuned in their lawn chairs and folded up their chairs and looked at one another. "Opal," said the preacher. "Arroo," said Winn-Dixie. "Yes, sir," I said. "Go get that dog," he yelled. "Yes, sir," I yelled back. I went outside and untied Winn-Dixie and brought him inside. He sat down beside me and smiled up at the preacher. The preacher couldn't help it. He smiled back. Winn-Dixie had that effect on him. And so the preacher started preaching again. Winn-Dixie sat there listening to it, wiggling his ears this way and that, trying to catch all the words. And everything would have been all right except for a mouse ran across the floor. The Open Arms had mice. They were there from when it was a Pick It Quick, and there were lots of good things in the building to eat. When the Pick It Quick became an Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi, the mice stayed around to eat all the leftover crumbs from the potluck suppers. The preacher kept on saying he was going to have to do something about them, but he never did. Because the truth is, he couldn't stand the thought of hurting anything, not even a mouse. Well, when Dixie saw that mouse, and he was up and after him. One minute everything was quiet and serious and the preacher was going on, and the next minute Winn-Dixie looked like a furry ballet, shooting across the building, chasing that mouse. He was barking and his feet were skidding all over the polished Pick It Quick floor. And people were clapping and hollering and pointing. They really went wild when Winn-Dixie actually caught the mouse. "I have never in my life seen a dog catch a mouse," said Mrs. Nordley. She was sitting next to me. "He's a special dog," I told her. "I imagine so," she said back. Winn-Dixie stood up there in front of the whole church, wagging his tail, holding the mice real careful in his mouth, holding on to him tight but not squishing him. "I believe that mutt has got some retriever in him," said somebody behind me. "That's a hunting dog." Winn-Dixie took the mouse over to the preacher and dropped it at his feet, and when the mouse tried to get away, Winn-Dixie put his paw right on the mouse's tail. Then he smiled up at the preacher. He showed him all his teeth. The preacher looked down at the mouse. He looked at Winn-Dixie. He looked at me and rubbed his nose. It got real quiet in the picket quick. "Let's pray," the preacher finally said, "for this mouse." And everybody started laughing and clapping. The preacher picked up the mouse by the tail and walked and threw it out the front door of the picket quick. Everybody applauded again. Then he came back. We all prayed together. I prayed for Mama. I told God how much she would have enjoyed hearing the story of Winn-Dixie catching that mouse. It would have made her laugh. I asked God if maybe he could be the one to tell her that story someday. And then I talked to God about how I was lonely in Naomi because I didn't have many kids there, only the ones from church. And there weren't that many kids in Open Arms, just Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry, 2 brothers who weren't twins, but looked like they were, and Amanda Wilkinson, whose face was always pinched up like she was smelling something real bad, and Sweetie Pie Thomas, who was only 5 years old, still mostly a baby, and none of them wanted to be my friend. Anyway, because they probably thought I would tell on them to the preacher for every little thing they did wrong, and they would get in trouble with God and their parents. So I told God that I was lonely, even having Winn-Dixie. And finally I prayed for the mouse, like the preacher suggested. I pray that he didn't get hurt when he went flying out the door of the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi. I prayed that he landed on a nice soft patch of grass.